Okay, welcome back. And today's session is on conflict resolution. We're going to be talking about fighting, something that we know a lot about.
Let's have a fight.
We fight. I'd say we fight probably more than a lot of couples. I'm not really sure because we're not inside of your life, but
we have a few solid ones per week.
We're pretty fiery and we're very strong and opinionated and independent. And as much as we are opposites in a lot of ways, we're also very strong leader types. And so that can be challenging to navigate. And so I think we've had a lot of practice at fighting. I think we're doing pretty good. But we've told you how, we started out with a crazy anxious dynamic, anxious avoidant dynamic, and have sort of worked our way towards more secure and safe conflict resolution. So today we're going to kind of take you through the tools that we have learned and some of the principles that we follow to fight more fair and to possibly even leave a conflict laughing and giggling and snuggling rather than wanting to pack up and move to Tibet, which I only do like once a month now.
Okay, before we go through some of these points, can you just address some of the principles?
Sure.
Okay, I want to come back to two of the principles that are really worth mentioning at this point in the course. Number 2 was relationships aren't always easy. There's no such thing as a perfect partner, relationship, or marriage. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we expect relationship to just flow all the time, and when it's not flowing, we can catastrophize in our minds, which catastrophizing is like when it's like, oh my God, this whole thing's a disaster because we're not flowing right now. We're not having agreement right now, or our moods aren't the same as each other. And what we've realized over time and what we've heard from all of the teachers that we've learned from who have decades of studying other couples is that it's very normal to have those times where you're having a disagreement, an argument about this or that. Your moods are not in the same place. You're not experiencing flow. You're sort of like bumping into each other. That's very normal. And I think that's the main thing to acknowledge. It doesn't always have to be easy. One of the things that I learned early on in a seminar that I went to is this piece that always stuck with me. Disagreement does not equal rejection. Like we all have this like little sensitive piece in us that whenever someone doesn't agree with something, we feel rejected and we get our feelings hurt and then we lash out at the other person. And the truth is that little thing is the source of many of our conflicts. Like I give a bid to you, whether it's just like, hey, go look at that over there, or I open a conversation and you're not ready for it, or you don't agree with something I said about what's out there, and then I get my feelings hurt and we start bumping about it. So that's where a lot of our conflicts come from, and we need to figure out how to repair that stuff once it sort of like boils up. The other one is conflict does not mean war. It's an opportunity to learn my partner's heart. Mm-hmm. What we found is that on the other side of our conflicts, there are always lessons in what got us there and in understanding what's going on inside the other person. So there's a lot of opportunity here if we can navigate conflict with curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the piece around recognizing that disagreement doesn't mean rejection is really important because, as we said, we do tend to come into our adult relationships with our, history from childhood and our past conditioning. And a lot of times it wasn't safe in the family system to disagree, or we were all sort of asked to collude on things. So we learned that in order to stay safe in the village, that we all had to collude on an idea or a belief or a judgment about something or someone. You see this when you look at families who all have, similar political beliefs, and then somebody else has a different belief, and that can cause a lot of disruption. And so it's similar when we come into our adult relationships. We feel that same anxiety or that same fear when there's disagreement, and what's behind that is this idea that perhaps, if there is a disagreement, that means that we aren't going to be loved anymore, or if that we're not going to be safe. And so really recognizing that the number one key to have with you in conflict resolution is to make safety a priority, to remember that conflict is growth trying to happen, as the lovely Harville Hendricks always says in his books, to know that curiosity over defensiveness is going to lead you into deeper intimacy with your partner. So when Ben was talking about making a bid for connection, what he's really talking about is this concept of leaning towards our partner, or leaning away from our partner, or turning against. So if Ben is to say, look at that beautiful tree over there, and I ignore him, I'm sort of turning away. If I turn against him and say, who cares about that tree? I'm turning against. And if I say, wow, that's an amazing tree. I love that you just noticed that tree. Such a beautiful day. That's turning towards, right? And so throughout our day with our partner, we're constantly making bids for attention. And a lot of conflict can happen actually when we are unconsciously turning away from our partner's bids, or turning against our partner's bids with our language or our communication, and we don't realize it. And that stuff builds up resentment. It takes away the safety and the trust and the admiration that is between you two. So when we are rewiring how we show up for each other, how we show up in conflict has to do with how we show up in our day-to-day communication. If we've made it a pattern of turning against or turning away, then chances are it's going to feel really wobbly and weird to all of a sudden try practicing leaning into each other when we're in conflict. So we actually want to make this a day-to-day, moment-to-moment practice. Whenever your partner is making a bid, even if you're busy, you could say, hey, that's a really beautiful tree. I'm actually in the middle of writing right now and I need some quiet time, so could we talk later? But just giving that acknowledgement, right? And we're not perfect at that. We're working on it, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind. So when we're working towards healthy conflict, we also want to observe what are the behaviors that we're doing on a day-to-day basis that is causing conflict to happen, right? And for us in our relationship, it's very energetic, which is why the intimacy practices and the dyads that we're going to take you through are going to be so important to transform the energy of your relationship. So you want to start noticing what you're feeling in your body and what stories you're making in your mind when conflict is arising, and start to manage that within yourself. And so that you can start to work together when you feel conflict about to happen, or when you feel yourself starting to get resentful. We're going to give you strategies to voice that and name it and even clear it before it has a chance to erupt.
Okay, let's talk about conflict as an opportunity to heal your wounds. What does that mean?
So I shared the story of how, I grew up in and out of foster homes, and I had experienced a lot of abandonment and a lot of betrayal. So my style is to wall off and to self-protect, to not show my vulnerability, to not let my partner in, and to go into the survivor archetype, which is like, I got this, I can do it all on my own, I don't need you. Why don't you share your conditioning with your brother, and then we can kind of dive into what that looks like in conflict and where the growth is.
Yeah, my conditioning, I had a brother who essentially bullied me all throughout childhood, and I never really felt safe to express myself, express my emotions, express my needs in my home. If I spoke up and received some energy from my mom, primarily because she was the one who was around the most, I would usually get some kind of like lash back from my brother. And in conflict, so as a result, in childhood, what I learned to do was kind of like hide at home and not really speak to what I was feeling, what was going on inside me, because that wasn't really okay. And so in conflict with Shalina, I tend to pop up into my head and try to figure out what's going on with her, try to solve her emotions or her problems. And it's just like shields up. I just like defend against everything that she's saying if it implies there's something wrong with me. And I don't show any vulnerability. So here we both are like shields up, not showing any vulnerability to each other. And meanwhile, the goal is for us to find love again through this conflict. It's to contact each other's heart. So you can see how there's like a stone wall between us. We're sort of both stonewalling. And we've got to figure out how to get through that.
Yeah, and so in the beginning, when we first started dating, before we were married, we were in this pattern where we would get into conflict, and then I would get really anxious and upset, and I would want to work it out right away. And Ben would shut down, and he would often leave the house, avoid me for days. Like, I think we went 2 days without speaking once. And of course, my anxiety levels were really high, and I was coming to him, wanting to use the tools that we were studying at the time, because we did start this work basically as soon as we got into relationship. So we already had the tools, but we hadn't integrated them yet. So it was a lot different back then. So I would be kind of pushing him to be ready faster. And at the same time, I would be, pointing out that he was projecting his brother on me, or that he was being avoidant. And I was really overly focused on him changing his behavior, because my idea was, well, I'm doing the work because I'm leaning in, and he's not doing the work because he's avoiding. I see exactly what's going on here, and he's the one who needs to change in order for this pattern to shift.
Yeah, that would piss me off more, and that would make me want to move away more. And like I was just describing about how, like, when we're in conflict and I'm popping up into my head, that's actually just one way that I run. So you're describing, like, you run towards me and I run away from you. That's kind of our pattern. You're anxious, I'm avoidant. And in my home, I learned to run in one of two ways. One was I just check out mentally, and the other is I run physically. I ran away from home all the time, and I avoided my family all the time, and that tended to be my number one. But when I can't run physically, I run mentally. So a lot of people can probably relate to that. So yeah, when you're sitting in front of me and I'm actually like holding my ground physically, I still am running in my mind. And that's important to recognize.
Yeah, it's a good distinction. So, okay, so how did we shift this pattern? Because we don't really engage in that way anymore. And I think what really shifted for me was one day I had this epiphany, and I was like, wow, I am so focused on him. Like, here I am thinking I'm doing the work because I'm so conscious, because I've been studying all this stuff for 10 years and I know everything. And if I could just get him to wake up to his projections, then everything would be fine, right? So instead, one day we sat down, we had a clearing. This was a few days after we had been in a conflict and it hadn't really been resolved. And I was feeling really frustrated with this pattern, and I was sort of at my wit's end. And I remember saying to him that I was going to let go, that I wasn't going to point out his work anymore. I wasn't going to make him wrong when his projections were coming up, and that if he couldn't hold space for me when we were in conflict, that I was going to go and feel my feelings, and I was going to go and take care of myself. And so the next time we had conflict, I asked him to hold space. He wasn't able to. He said he couldn't. And so I laid down on the bed, and I just put my hand on my heart and on my belly, and I just breathed, and I called forth my inner child, and I just wept, and I felt my fear and my sadness and my anger, and I cried and I screamed into a pillow. And actually, Ben came towards me pretty quickly. And then as I began doing that more and more, I started to feel more empowered, and I started to realize that he was coming towards me more because I had given him space, and I had given him permission to be who he was, and I was no longer making him wrong for needing that time. I started to think about what was he experiencing when he was moving away, and it wasn't that he was bad or that he didn't care or that he was a jerk. It was that he was overwhelmed, he was emotionally flooded, and I really wasn't respecting or honoring his space. So it really did take me stepping out of my own self-centeredness in order for that pattern to shift, even though if we had continued in that dynamic, his behavior wouldn't have worked for me long term. Like, if we were still in that dynamic, that would have been a boundary for me. I would have been like, we can't continue this. Something needs to shift. But I'm not really able to say that it's up to my partner to make the change until I've actually fully stepped into that change myself and given my partner space to step into a new space with me. So that's where we're both responsible. And as I did that, I found that I felt less anxious and I felt less urgency to work things out. So now if we're in conflict, not only am I able to relax into that and not feel like we need to work it out right away, but sometimes I actually don't even feel the need to have a conversation about it. Sometimes now we get into a little bit of a heated conflict for a minute or two where we snap at each other and we're able to just say, I'm sorry about that. That wasn't what I meant to say. I love you. Let's move on. If it's a big conflict, we do a process, which we're going to guide you through. But the point is that there's a lot of healing that can happen when we start to realize that it really is something in us that's looking to integrate. So for me personally, as the anxious one, I was out of my power whenever we were in conflict because I needed him to do something in order for me to be okay. And when we stepped outside of that and I learned how to self-soothe, I became more empowered. And it really helped me when Ben would say, it's okay to have conflict. It's okay that we don't work it out right this minute. It's okay to just take some space. We're not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. And that was sort of his role to reassure me. And that was his work as somebody who was in the more avoidant space. But I think that it's really beautiful what can happen because we sort of mature and grow up through conflict when we are asked to really be fully responsible for what happens inside of our dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on the other side of things, the things that have been really useful for me in interrupting this pattern, one has been the awareness of the pattern where you're moving towards me in a strong way and I'm moving away from you in a strong way. And knowing that pattern, the more we increase the intensity, the more wild things get and the less resolution we have.
Yeah.
So if you back off that chase and I back off that run a little bit, we find a little bit more of a secure, grounded place. And so I've been trying to lessen the amount of time that I run for. And when I run to some place like the gym, and then I have a sauna, and then I do a meditation after a cold shower, and I meditate on the conflict that we had and what's the source of it, and like, what was she really feeling that I never held space for in the moment? What am I feeling? And what's the big picture of our relationship? And usually, like when I just take some space to do that, and I come back to love in my own mind, and I realize like, okay, this is a little thing that we did and it's blowing up into a big thing, and a part of my mind just wants to pull the plug on this relationship and like disappear for a week just to teach her a lesson. Like if I can work myself through that crap, I can come home and say, hey babe, you want to talk? Or if you get to me first and you say, hey, do you want to talk? I accept your bid. Whereas in the past I may have like rejected it just to like stab you. So yeah, if I put the sword down, I put the shield down, that's me doing the work, and actually like listen and hold space for the thing that needs to be discussed.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And sometimes I can't work all this out on my own in my own mind in the sauna. I reach out to another guy or my men's group or like my parents. Sometimes I have great parents that I can talk to about relationships. So that's what's been useful for me in the process.
Yeah, it's that concept that we've talked about before, which is competing to let go first. And we've really made a pattern of that now in our relationship. And it's fun actually when you're working on creating more conscious conflict in your life and you start to practice. Conflict almost becomes this exciting thing. Like I remember, I think it maybe was like 8 or 9 months ago, and we had a conflict, and it was something little, like you had said something to me that hurt my feelings, and I totally shut down, and then we went up to the bedroom about half an hour later, and we had a little clearing about it, and by the end we were laughing and we were snuggling, and it felt like such an achievement. It was like, oh, we just finished a conflict by laughing and snuggling, and it almost made me excited to have more conflict because I was like, oh, we're getting better at this. And I think that's the thing, is to remember that conflict is always going to be present in your relationship to some extent. Some, really hot relationships, like two really fiery types like us, you might fight a lot, but you can do it in a way that is silly. Like sometimes we catch ourselves 2 minutes after a fight and we look at each other and we just laugh because we're like, wow, that's so ridiculous. And then there's other, other elemental types where if you're a more watery couple, you might not fight that often. You might have a lot more flow, but when you do have a conflict, it might feel really, really intense. And so just trust that whatever your style is, however conflict presents, it's okay to have that. You just want to learn how to really see each other in the moment and not get too pulled into the story of it, which is, for me, it's this idea like I'm not safe and I need to wall up and be alone and run away. And it's very similar for you as well.
Mm-hmm.
So start to take note of what the stories are that you make up in your mind when you're in conflict with your partner. And one thing I like to practice is actually just voicing it. So saying, like, I really feel like running away right now, and I feel like I'm shutting down, and my mind is telling me that, like, this isn't gonna work, and that, I need to leave. Sometimes if I just voice that, and my partner can reassure me and tell me that everything's okay, then can kind of snap me back into reality, right?
Yeah, there's this beautiful shift that I've experienced over the years sitting in conflict with you, where initially, whenever we're in conflict and it's about us and our relationship, I feel like you've got an objection with something that I've done or something about me, and I get on the defensive about it, and then I start pointing out your faults or reasons why you're wrong and that thing's not true. And it's a defensive stance. I'm defending myself. I'm defending my honor. I'm defending like how I see myself versus how you see yourself. And that often doesn't go very well. And so that's defensive. There's another stance that I can take when we're in conflict, which is curiosity. And I can be curious about myself, but even more so, I can be curious about what's going on inside of you, that these words are coming out of your mouth, that you're feeling this and that you're saying this thing about me that maybe I don't see as true, but why are you experiencing that? And like, what's underneath that? And who am I reminding you of right now? And how was your day? Like, what weight are you carrying around right now that's making this thing so huge for you? And coming to that place of curiosity, and like I was sort of alluding to that when I was talking about sitting in the sauna, thinking about the essence of the conflict and thinking like, what was going on for her? When I can get into that place, that opens my heart, and it also, it unknowingly, it's like I put the shield down without even noticing that I'm doing that, and it opens up the conversation, and so I can sit with you, I can hold space. Curiosity is like the core principle, that the fuel behind being able to actually hold space. So I can sit and be like, just like, think about what's going on with you, rather than like, don't look at me. Like the shield, it's just protection. So dropping that protection is like the ticket for me in conflict with you. Let's talk about repair. How do we repair conflict? So, like I mentioned before, repair is really about coming back to love and understanding the other person, seeing the other person's heart. If I can see the wounded little girl inside of you, it's really easy for us to have a repair and for us to come back to love. So let's talk about how people can get there.
Yeah, so there's a few things to keep in mind. When we're talking about repair, what we're talking about is apologizing, taking ownership and accountability for how we showed up. If we, maybe we were edgy with our partner, or we were a little bit dismissive of them, or, we were rude or whatever. We have these moments where we get stressed and then we kind of lash out at our partner. It's important to have that distinction, though, that abusive language or calling names or attacking, that kind of stuff really destroys and erodes trust and safety in a partnership faster than anything else. So if that is a pattern, that is something that you really want to take very seriously and work with a couples therapist. I really love Imago Dialogue for that, if you can find an Imago therapist. I just want to mention that because there's a difference between making a repair and apologizing when you show up in a stressed and heated moment versus constantly thinking that you can lash out at your partner in really hurtful ways and then just apologize and then make it all better. We really want to be accountable for how we show up. So our language and our energy and our intention for how we show up matters. And that doesn't mean perfection, but there is a line, and we need to respect that line in order to have a healthy and safe partnership. And you deserve to be treated with respect, and so does your partner. So a healthy repair for us often looks like one of us walking up to the other person after we've, maybe had an edgy moment or been short with each other. And sometimes I'll just walk up to Ben and be like, sorry, I was a bitch to you.
I'm sorry, I was a dick to you.
Thanks. And it's, you can use whatever language you want. Like I said, we're fiery and silly and we're kind of crass with each other sometimes. So that kind of language works. But if that doesn't work for you, that's okay. The point is that it doesn't have to be a big thing. If you have a little blip, you don't want to ignore it, you want to acknowledge it. So I'm always aware of when I'm being a little bit edgy or harsh with Ben in my energy, and it doesn't feel good in my body afterwards. I know that because I can feel it. And sometimes apologizing feels hard. It feels like a little bit humiliating maybe. Maybe I feel a little bit shy, like I don't really want to look him in the eye and admit that I wasn't so nice back there. But when I do, what I notice is that both of us light up. So sometimes he'll come to me and just say, sorry for the way that I showed up 20 minutes ago. And I can't help but smile ear to ear because I just feel relieved that was acknowledged, and I don't need a big thing about it. It's just I know that my partner knows that energy didn't feel good and that wasn't the standard we want to set, and just having that acknowledgement makes me trust partnership more. Because when we are constantly in like a harshness or an intense energy with our partner and we're not acknowledging it, there can be a fear that our partner doesn't take it seriously, or that that's okay for them, or that they are going to continue in that pattern. And for me personally, as somebody who grew up in an unsafe environment, that triggers fear in me. Like, oh my goodness, is this going to be what my life is like now? Like, is my partner going to be harsh with me all the time? Like, are they going to start trying to control me or take advantage of me? Like, my mind can just go out of control with that kind of stuff. So it's really, really important that we be mindful of how our energy impacts our partner and the stories that can come up. So being willing to apologize is such a gift. There's a book by a favorite author of mine called Why Won't You Apologize by Harriet Lerner, and you might want to check that book out. And I think it's just a really powerful practice to come back to, just to look your partner in the eye and just say, I'm really sorry, that's not how I wanted to show up. I love you.
Yes, it feels really good to receive an apology or to give an apology in short form and to come back to love. And I just want to speak to the point that it's important to acknowledge, recognize, and speak to where the conflict came from, what is the origin of the conflict, and have a conversation that's a little bit less inflammatory. And so how do we do that? We're going to teach a number of different ways of approaching dialogue, but I want to give a little example here of something called NVC, nonviolent communication. I had a client the other day who wrote his brother a letter with a bunch of stuff, judgments, criticisms, things that he wasn't comfortable with about how he sees his brother behaving with his family, with his mother. And he sent me the first draft of the letter, and it was littered with like swears, judgments, names, and I read this and was like, this guy is not going to receive any of the information that's in this letter. It's way too harsh. And the way it read is in many ways the way that some conflicts go, where there's name calling and it's just off the handle, right? Nobody's getting any clear information out of this kind of an interaction. So you have the blow up, you come back together. How do you have that conversation in a way where the person's actually going to hear it? Nonviolent communication is a scripted format that helps you figure out exactly what it is that is going on inside you and what you want from the other person. And so it's basically 4 lines. When you blank, when you slam doors and throw stuff in the house. I feel blank, scared and not safe in the house. The third line is, what I need is space when you're angry. I need space from you, and I need safety in order to feel safe in my home. So I got him to rewrite every paragraph with one point in each one and write it all in NVC format. And the second draft was amazing. And it read as something that could actually be received by the other person. He sent it to his brother and he said it was well received. So, and this is a guy who blows up really easily. So that's just an example of how important it is to communicate in the right way, even after conflict, in talking about what the thing was that came up. Because there are serious things that we need to talk about, and we have to figure out how to talk about them in a way that the other person can receive it, and in a way that we can articulate what's really going on inside of us rather than name calling or judgments. So that's why I like nonviolent communication, and really just having a script that you can follow that helps you figure out what you're feeling and what you need from the other person and what was the source of the conflict.
Yeah, scripts have worked really well for us. We've trained in so many different tools, and they all involve using dialogue scripts. Mm-hmm. Some are really long, some are really simple. The ones that we've done in our tantric practices are really simple, and we're going to share some of those ones with you guys first. But I would say that when we're thinking of nonviolent communication, when Ben's referencing, name calling or violent communication, I think in our minds we might think that it's really blatant and outright, where someone's calling somebody a name or being really directly harsh. But what I know about conscious couples, and I've even joked about this with other conscious couple friends when we're all doing the work, is that sometimes your conflicts can even get more brutal because you do understand the psychology of what's happening. And so we can almost play this holier than thou righteous position in our conflicts. So Ben and I totally have the capacity to have a really calm, cool, collected conflict and not raise our voices, not get mean, but also be kind of condescending the entire time. Mm-hmm. And psychoanalyze each other. And I feel like that is a form of violent communication. It's not listening. You're not being compassionate. You're not heart open. It is still a very defensive stance. It just looks better. So keep in mind that there are many ways that this presents, and what we're working on is true embodiment of these teachings, where we are genuinely learning how to slow down and listen and really feel the love we have for our partner when we are in conflict. And if we can't do that, to take space until we can come back to that, so that I genuinely actually want to hear you, and I'm not just thinking about getting my point across.
Yeah, it's not about being right? That I think that's one of the most important things that we didn't really touch on that much. Mm-hmm. Conflict resolution isn't about figuring out who's wrong. It's about coming back to love. It doesn't matter who is right.
Mm-hmm. Well, the truth is that it's so funny because we always think that there has to be someone who's right and wrong, because that's what we learned about conflict when we were young. I mean, I can remember growing up, and my programming was always about fighting to be right, or my caregivers would say, well, you need to stand up for yourself, or that guy's wrong. You see on the TV, debates, and everything is about winning or losing. Nobody wants to be a loser, of course. You remember that? Loser. So I don't know, did you guys do that?
Yes.
It's the loser thing,
yeah.
Right? So I think that it's just so deeply ingrained in us that we don't want to be losers, and I'm so certain that it doesn't actually matter, because there's no such thing as right or wrong in conflict. What I'm feeling is right because I'm feeling it, and what you're feeling is right because you're feeling it. Mm-hmm. We can both have our own experience and both be valid in that, and that's where we get to the gold, is knowing that we are always having a completely opposite and different experience, because we have different conditioning, different upbringings, different mindsets. We see the world differently, and isn't that beautiful? Mm-hmm. So instead of trying to get your partner to come on over to your side, or them trying to get you onto their side, we're like, wow, what is it like to see the world the way that you do? What can I learn from that? What can I learn about you and this reality? And how can I maybe integrate some of those parts? So we're going to move on now to the exercise portion where we guide you through some conflict resolution tools, and we'll see you over there. I'd like to do a clearing with you. Do you have the space?
Yes.
Okay. Something that I want you to know is that I feel that we've been a little bit disconnected over the last week. I feel like we've been working a lot and I've been writing a lot and I miss you. Something that I'm afraid of is that we are going to drift apart because we don't schedule enough time to connect. Something that I'm feeling is a little bit overstimulated from so much work and not enough play. And something that I need is more lightness, more time to play and connect and be in nature. Something that I appreciate about you is that you make an effort to listen to me and to hold space for my feelings.
Thank you for sharing with me.
Thanks for hearing me. I would like to have a clearing with you. Do you have the space?
Yes.
Okay. Something that I want you to know is that earlier today when we were in the kitchen, I got my feelings hurt when I was trying to have a conversation with you and I felt like you were dismissing me. Something that I'm afraid of is that I'm not important to you or that you don't respect me. And something that I'm feeling is hurt and sad. And something that I need is to feel seen and heard in this relationship. Something that I appreciate about you is that you're willing to hear me when I feel upset or when I've had my feelings hurt. I appreciate that you're willing to receive my feedback.
Thank you for sharing with me. Okay, I want to respond. Is that okay?
Yes.
Something I want you to know is that I move really fast, and when I'm getting things done, I find that it's really easy to hurt your feelings because I'm just kind of ramming around, and I don't want to hurt your feelings or make you feel disregarded. Something I'm afraid of is that my normal way of being, my base operating procedure, will forever hurt your feelings, that you'll never feel safe just like being around me. What I'm feeling right now is sad that your feelings got hurt. Something that I need is more clarity on when that stuff is happening, and I would love it if when that's happening, if you moved towards me and just came and gave me a kiss. That would be nice. I will give you kisses and hugs anytime. Maybe that can help. Something I appreciate about you is how well you understand yourself, and that you're able to recognize what's happening and just let me know, because information is power in this relationship. So thank you for speaking to what you need.